All right. I think we're ready to get going here. So it's my distinct honor and privilege to be speaking here tonight. Thank you to the organizers for the opportunity, and thank you to the audience for your kind attention on a Tuesday evening. The origin story of Agile at Salesforce figures prominently in me discovering the Bay ALN meetup group over a decade ago, and Bay ALN has been a huge boost to my career. I learned so much from our speakers and fellow attendees over those years. Coming back to pay it forward seems right. Your organizers asked me to speak about Kanban. I understand this was a popular topic in a survey of membership. So I invited my colleague Noel Vega to join me in the storytelling. We thought you might find it even more interesting if we used the same format we use to brief our customers who ask us how development and delivery works at Salesforce. So let's get started. Fire up the Wayback Machine and put yourself in the mid-2000s. Salesforce is a young and growing company, and growth brings challenges. Imagine this. You hear about Dreamforce, our annual customer conference. You get all excited and book your tickets and fly to San Francisco. You get up early the next day to attend the keynote and grab a good seat. Mark Benioff gets on stage and says nothing. He has nothing new to talk about. There are no new products to discuss, no new service announcements. We don't have any new innovations to announce because we as a company have not produced anything that is in production in over a year. It sounds crazy, even unbelievable, but I can tell you this is exactly where we were as an organization over a decade ago. We had to find an answer, and that answer turned out to be Agile. Now I'm going to show you a lawyerly statement here. This is called safe harbor or forward-looking statement. And essentially, we're a publicly traded company. Please make your buying decisions based only on products that are commercially available. But there's a special meaning for that in this talk, because one of the reasons that we do this statement is because this is how we develop software. We adopted safe hardware because we adopted the Agile mindset as an organization. And we acknowledge that we can't see into the future and have to trust teams to be autonomous and determine what and when they can deliver. The organization determines the strategy and the product, but teams determine how it should be built and when it will be ready. So again, please make your buying decisions on what's already in production. Alina did a great job of giving our background and bios already. I'm going to add a little bit of color to that to point out that my physics background gives me the intuition to see cues where work piles up. And my leadership experience gives me insights into applied psychology and helps me get people to pay attention to those cues. That combination makes me an ideal member of the greater Kanban community. And when we first contemplated delivering this talk, Noel was a peer of mine, a fellow Agile coach, but the pandemic ground on and he got a new role. And so we have a little bit of a different relationship now. He's still a colleague of mine, but he's also a potential client. So I can help him make the COO org perform better. Noel, anything you want to add to what Alina said before we get going?
Similarly, I think my history as an Agile coach has really helped me in this role as Director of Ops and Strategy for our technology COO organization. So what we hope to show you later is kind of how we're taking some Kanban concepts and practices into some of the processes that I now am responsible for in my new role, and how really Kanban is about improving any system, not just a software system.
Thanks, Noel. Just to give you a brief overview of what you're going to hear about tonight, your organizers asked us to speak about Kanban, and we're going to use the Agile team's executive briefing deck to frame our talk. The Salesforce Innovation Center that you saw on the title slide is where we speak to customers who have questions about how Salesforce works. And this is how we engage with customers who are curious about how teams and clouds build product at Salesforce. And we're very adamant about customizing it to the needs of our specific audience. So I'm going to end up sharing a personal story in this talk somewhere, connecting Agile at Salesforce with my early experience in Bay Agile Leadership Network. We'll also look back at that origin story using a Kanban mindset to understand why what we did worked. And I'm going to then tell some stories about using Kanban change management principles in my present work. Finally, Noel will outline future applications of Kanban outside of product development work. and we'll have a couple of participatory exercises along the way to help you reflect on the opportunities in your work. So we can get started on product delivery the Salesforce way. Noel, why don't you get us going?
Thanks, Erik. So the early days of Salesforce really resembled your typical startup story. Teams were next to each other. We were building things on the fly as customers needed them. There were very few teams. So things were very top down. But at the same time, there was also a lot of collaboration because odds are you were working on something with the folks sitting next to you or right across the way from you, which meant communication was pretty straightforward. And you knew you were going to deliver consistently because there were very few products. There was very little process. You basically were able to go straight into production like you'd see with a lot of startups. And this led to rapid growth for Salesforce. And at the outset led to a lot of success, which in turn caused the number of customers to increase, which in turn created a need for more engineers, more products. Unfortunately, over time, what we found was this early model didn't really set us up for success as we started growing into the larger company we would be in the early and mid 2000s. And it brought up a number of unplanned hurdles along the way. And over time, this led to unhappy customers, unhappy sales folks, unhappy engineers, unhappy stakeholders. In short, it led to a lot of challenges despite the early success. So we talked about this rapid growth. Once we got there, communication got a lot more strained. Instead of dealing with somebody that was sitting next to you, you might be working with a colleague from across the country, but we didn't necessarily have processes for that. As we started developing multiple product lines, it wasn't necessarily clear what the top priority was. You might be pulled into 3 or 4 top priorities. As those product lines got more and more complex, we started introducing team dependencies, and managing those dependencies was another challenge. And when you add all this up, this led to a lot of difficulty with predictable releases. At the time, we were releasing an initiative once it was all set to go. Unfortunately, as these things got larger and all these priorities would come into play, it was hard to get to a point where something was considered done. And at the same time, the release process itself got more and more complicated. So it was really hard to say we're going to release on a certain day, because it was just really hard to say that our initiative would be done by that certain day. This graph kind of shows exactly what we're talking about here. Over time, the number of days between major releases would increase dramatically. And at the same time, the number of features you're delivering per team would get smaller and smaller because these features were getting monolithic. They were just huge. You didn't necessarily know what was in them. What was in them could be low quality. And it got to the point where in 2006, our major release cycle was 15 months long. In other words, we didn't have a major release in 2006. That's not going to make many people happy. Erik will talk about this in a little bit, but we refer to this as the year of living dangerously because we really did live dangerously. Engineers were unhappy, stakeholders were unhappy, customers were unhappy. This was clearly a problem, so we needed a solution.
We'll be using evolution as a metaphor throughout this talk. And in evolution, the concept of punctuated equilibrium is quite relevant. You may be familiar with the story of how a meteor impact killed off the dinosaurs. That punctuation point was an extinction level event for dinosaurs that opened up the planet for the evolution of mammals like us. But we would like to avoid such extinction events in business. They're kind of catastrophic. The inability to ship for over a year could be viewed as an imminent extinction event, and it was time to take big steps in the evolution of Salesforce as a company and a business. Now, this is where my personal story comes in. Steve Green was a key leader in what happened next. Before Steve came to Salesforce, he and I were colleagues at Digital Think, where I led engineering and Steve led QA. When he was leading the transformation at Salesforce, I was doing something similar in another Bay Area company, and I was paying attention to Steve's work. I remember him giving talks about it. It piqued my interest, so I asked him how I could come up to speed on Agile and what he was doing. And he pointed me straight to this meetup group, to the Bay Agile Leadership Network. I think there was a P in the name at the time, but this is the same meetup group. And I recall that his talk was called The Year of Living Dangerously, after the famous movie. And I spent a lot of time in the Bay ALN over the next few years, including some time on the coordinating committee. I wouldn't be standing here today giving this talk without having had that early Bay ALN experience. This group has been great for my career, and I hope it's going to be great for your career too. I couldn't find a copy of Steve's early presentations, but I do have a related Stanford paper at hand called The Development Dilemma at Salesforce.com. Zooming in, we can see what an imminent extinction level event looked like at the time. The existing development processes had been slipping for some time. The pace of releases of new software features had slowed from 4 times per year to once per year, and the latest release was taking even longer than that. Morale was suffering, key staff were resigning, and we even had a production outage in the pre-holiday time period when customers rely on us the most. It was clearly time to take some drastic measures. So let's jump back to the main story.
So for us, we decided Agile was the solution. Instead of trying to release when the entire initiative was done, it was important to us to start getting features out the door and start getting feedback from customers, make our customers happy with some portion rather than waiting 15 months long to get an entire initiative. So we started fixing the number of days between major releases to the point where, and we'll go into this in a little bit, we can tell you years in advance when a major release is going to occur. What's going to vary will be the features in that release. If something's not ready, we're not going to push it out. We'll wait for the next release. But what does get released will be of the highest quality, and we can guarantee there will be something released. So for us, we decided on 3 major releases per year, which I know it's not necessarily the most agile of mindsets, but at the same time, we do have a very complex platform upon which a lot of customers are building their own solutions. And so there's been kind of a tendency to want to set expectations for them and be able to let them plan around what's coming so that their customizations can be seamless and work in perpetuity. So for us, we release 3 times a year. In fact, one of our acquisitions, Marketing Cloud, actually releases 5 times a year, but the concept is still the same. Years out, we're going to know we're going to have a spring, summer, fall release every year. What's going to, as we mentioned earlier, will vary what goes into the release, but we also use these releases to be able to get feedback from customers. We have things like our idea exchange, which can help inform what our next release is going to be.
In hindsight, a primary effect of the transition work was to unblock the flow of releases. Flow is the key concept in Kanban, and in the maturity model, it appears at level 2. We'll talk more about the Kanban maturity model soon. For now, I just want you to notice that this transition unblocked flow and established a regular cadence of delivery. This is super important for the evolution of Salesforce as a business. Lead time and timely, predictable delivery are almost always customer fitness criteria. A specific form of consistency is the use of cadence to provide regular, predictable events. We're almost ready for the first exercise. The concept of flow has made it into our product marketing messaging. You may have heard that Slack is now a Salesforce company, and this slogan appears prominently on Slack's website. When work flows, customer success grows. That's a pretty powerful marketing message. And now I want to encourage you to think about the blockers and impediments to flow in your work. What benefits could be unlocked by removing those blockers? What would you tell your leaders they could get by attending to flow? So you can use the chat window, or there's probably a small enough number of us that we can just shout out loud into the into our microphones. Let's have a little session about the kinds of things that unblocking flow could achieve in your environment. Employee engagement is one word. When the work flows, employee engagement grows. That's similar to the comments about unhappy developers becoming happy again. So another thing you could say is developer happiness. We've also got a customer satisfaction flows. That's certainly customer satisfaction grows. That's certainly true. Any other ideas here? Anybody have any like regulatory approval steps you have to go through in your business? Trust, that's a pretty important one. When the work flows at a predictable cadence, the trust of your customers and also your employee base in the corporation grows. Transparency grows. That's a great example here. One of the ways to make work flow is to make work visible so everybody can see it. So transparency is also an aid to making it flow. Any other suggestions? Well, you can see that flow unlocks a lot of things that are important to your business and your work.
You're
So
going to find all the technical debt too.
Oh yeah, yeah. And in fact, with technical debt, I think one of the things that will come up later is that when you shrink your development cycles to increase the flow, you also uncover some of the technical debt that was hiding. Here's another great one: organizational knowledge, and one of the principles that we like to espouse here is that knowledge is created, that learning happens, and that happens by actually working together and having the workflow. So organizational knowledge is a great answer there. All right, if there's no more, I'm going to jump back to the executive briefing. Thanks for all your contributions there. And oops, I went a little too fast. There you go.
So Erik gave you a little bit of a sneak peek, but as Agile coaches, we advise our teams that there are really two levels of maturity. Granted, there's more, but from our approach, there's two. There's doing Agile, so that's where the practices of Scrum and Kanban come into play. And then there's being Agile, and that's where the principles and values are kind of embedded in your DNA. You may bend a little bit on the practices, as long as it's the teams that are making that decision, they're doing it for the right reasons. And they're just really kind of flowing. We want that to be our North Star. So really it all starts with having principles and values in mind, because the practices can come from a book. You don't necessarily need an Agile organization to tell you to run a retro, have a 2-week sprint. What you need is us telling what the right principles and values. Underpinning all of that is psychological safety. We need to empower our teams and our engineers to tell us what's going on, to make the changes necessary, to speak up, to give us feedback, to be courageous and take a chance, experiment on process improvements. Without that, none of this would work. And so for us, we have 7 key principles for Agile at Salesforce. You may recognize these as lean principles because these are in fact borrowed straight from lean, but to us, this really speaks to where we're trying to go. Number 1, respect people. We want to hire the best and brightest, and we want to let them do the work they're capable of. We don't want to dictate to them exactly how to engineer and so on and so forth. We want to build quality into the process. We don't want to wait till the last minute to test. We want testing to be in everything we do. We want code reviews, approvals, etc. Everything necessary to keep customer trust. Create knowledge. We don't want to encourage a bunch of silos and subject matter experts everywhere. We want the teams to be able to work together. We want to de-risk the products we're building, but at the same time, also allow an engineer to go out on vacation because the rest of the team can pick up the slack on whatever they were working on. Deliver fast doesn't necessarily mean what your classic executive wants. We don't necessarily say we want the entire initiative yesterday. What we want is some amount of value built early and often, out the door quickly, that we can take a look at and pivot as necessary. Eliminate waste. This is kind of my approach to my new role. I believe in trying to get 60 hours worth of value in 30 hours worth of work. How do we do that? Let's find out where our inefficiencies are and let's eliminate those. Optimize the whole. We want to be thinking about how to get end-to-end delivery of business value optimized as much as possible. I've seen teams automate through tech debt or automate through task work on their own backlog to a point of assigning it to another team and then having it sit there. What's really advanced things is when that team works with the other team and now you have end-to-end automation, now things go 10 times faster. Can we think about the full system as a whole? And finally, just-in-time decisions. How do we keep our options open to the last responsible moment? Use as much information as possible before we make a decision versus getting locked into something we decide early on, then finding out when it's too late it was the wrong decision. So those are our principles. Beneath those are the values of Salesforce. This is what we believe in. These are the things that drive who we are as a company. Number 1, we mentioned a couple of times, we hear it 1,000 times every day at work. Trust is our number 1 value. As customers, you will be trusting us with your data, your customizations, your apps, Well, we don't want to lose that trust. We want to maintain that. We want to have our infrastructure be the most trusted cloud infrastructure in the world. Customer success has to be in the middle of everything we do. We want to make sure that everybody that's building and supporting everything we're putting out has your success in mind, because your success is our success. Innovation, Salesforce pioneered the software as a service idea years ago. Well, that came from innovation. We want to do what we can to facilitate more and more innovation, be at the cutting edge. And of course, you probably heard quite a bit of Salesforce getting involved with equality. We really do believe that. We believe that our best chance at innovation is having a workforce that represents the communities in which we're in. Having different viewpoints, different cultural viewpoints, different experiences leads to better innovation.
I've put all those things together on one slide here because I want to make a point about how practices follow principles and follow values. And you could put outcomes over on the right if you wanted to make that be a complete string. They really depend on each other. Values are the foundation. They are who we are. The principles are how we live, and the practices are how we do things. All right, so we're ready to take a deeper dive and bring in more concepts from Kanban and the maturity model. And we can ask ourselves, what guidance have we got to make moving forward easier and more productive? So change management experts recognize the value of meeting their clients where they are. The Kanban method version of this is represented by these principles. As with the meteor slide, we'll use evolution as a metaphor. It's funny because I'm a physicist by education, and here I'm using biology instead. That's because change is a social process, not a mechanical one. If you want to get anywhere with change, you have to start by respecting the current process, roles, responsibilities, and titles before you agree to pursue incremental and evolutionary change. And you're going to ask and encourage for acts of leadership at all levels in your organization. Those are the principles of the Kanban method. And before I leave the slide, let me address a small elephant here. You may be wondering how a big bang agile transformation, as I described earlier, matches with this incremental evolutionary change guidance. Well, the truth is the big bang is not ideal, but it's way better than extinction. But going forward, we can use the incremental evolutionary change model to avoid situations like a year of living dangerously. So let's go on and see how that works. Have you ever tried to persuade somebody to adopt new practices because they are better? That usually doesn't work out so well. I'll model that a little bit later with some role playing, but for now, let's stipulate to this progression that outcomes follow practices, that practices follow culture, that culture follows values, and therefore you should lead with values. We can see that the advice of lead with values is embedded in both the Agile at Salesforce briefing and the Kanban maturity model material. So those things are congruent, and we can be reasonably confident that what we learn in Kanban can be applied at Salesforce. And those values that we talk about here are a huge part of our culture. Coming back to the slide that I just showed you, the only difference is principles versus culture on the middle chevron there. And with the insight that both culture and principles represent how we live, we can observe the same virtuous cycle in Salesforce and in the Kanban method. So values are who we are. They tend to vary much more slowly than the other things, but culture, practices, and outcomes can improve over time. The key insight here with this wheel is that this is a loop. It's a virtuous cycle. How we live affects how we do things, and how we do things affects our outcomes, what we can do, and the capabilities we can acquire. And once you've got new capabilities and have achieved new things, it may change your culture. You can go around this loop over and over again. And that's how we pursue incremental evolutionary change. Too big of a change all at once may not be feasible. Instead, we assess where we are and look for the next reachable step. And that's where the maturity model comes in. There is way too much detail in the full Kanban maturity model for a talk like this. Fortunately, the organizational maturity view will serve our purpose here. This poster models 6 levels of organizational maturity using a pizza business as an example. You can't go from level 0 to level 6 in one leap, but you can go from 0 to 1 and then spend some time consolidating your gains before you attempt to go from level 1 to level 2, so on and so forth. Zooming in, we can see how this analysis could apply to our initial transformation. Recall that we found ourselves in a situation with inconsistent release processes that relied on individual heroic effort, depended highly on the individual, and the process was emerging and still inconsistent. I called out earlier that unblocking flow makes level 2 accessible. And indeed, we were able to move from an emerging inconsistent release process to a defined release process that is followed consistently. This is much better, but still relies on managers who are monitoring work and approving changes. So we need to get all the way to level 3 to have always happy customers. In that place, the service will always be consistent no matter who's in charge or on staff on a given day, and we have time to get better, time for improvement. The vendor is perceived to be reliable and trustworthy. It's a nice place to be, level 3. If I simplify that even further, the cultural forms on this graphic are a pretty good tell for what is going on. Before the initial transformation, we were already team focused, but relied on individual heroics to resolve dependencies across teams. You could get up from your chair, walk over to a nearby desk, and influence your colleagues on the other team directly. But as you heard, growth made that harder for individual effort like that to be effective. And our initial Agile transformation doubled down on being customer driven and sought to restore a consistent delivery cadence. And that shifted the required heroics from individual contributors working individual problems to managers working on the system. And my clients light up when I call out managerial heroic as a tell for level 2. Their work-life balance and the quality of the decisions they make would be vastly improved by reducing the demand for managerial heroics and reducing the work in process for managers and leaders of people. And you can do that by going to level 3 and aligning behind customer purpose. The evolutionary metaphor there is fitness for purpose, and the purpose is customer success. We do have examples of higher level forms across our company, but most of my work happens to be around helping my clients become more fit for purpose and less dependent on managerial heroics. So that's a pretty good high-level introduction to the maturity model and how it helps make progress going forward. And now we're at a place where we can jump back to the executive briefing material.
Thanks, Erik. So our Agile coaches are here to help drive and scale organizational agility. We partner at all levels of the organization, and we really work not just on implementing your Scrum and Kanban, but we're really fundamental to all of our planning and release processes. We're responsible for training and workshops to get the foundational knowledge of Scrum, Kanban, and the roles underneath to all of the folks in the organization. We also work with facilitation techniques. We give tips and tricks along the way for planning, so on and so forth. We do, of course, coach teams directly, as well as leaders, planners, program managers, et cetera, to build Agile maturity, not only through your standard practices, but also in how those practices can work with your planning, with your release model, so on and so forth. But of course, we have an organization of something like 45 Agile coaches coaching something like 9,200 engineers. So we need some scale, and that does rely on our Agile champions, our Scrum Masters and product owners. So we've developed an in-house certification program to ensure that we have Scrum Masters and product owners that can help expand our rollout, expand our Agile transformation through their teams. So we do work with them, we do certify Scrum Masters, and then we look to the Scrum Masters to kind of generate grassroots support. Along the same lines, we do work to build communities of practice where Agile champions can get together, exchange tips, surface issues, and continue that ground level support from the bottom up. We really want this to be from the bottom up. There's been a lot of top down along the way that we've tried to overcome. We do find that when it's more organic and driven by the engineers, by the folks, it's more successful. We do assess teams as well as our organizations, as well as our release processes, et cetera. We do define metrics. We work with tools to be able to see just what is the agile health of our teams and where we have areas for improvement. And of course, along that way, we do help support the tools and frameworks, whether it be our internal work management system, whether it be helping to facilitate an agile release planning process or more. We do help support along the way. So where we are now, after all of that, we have about 1,000 plus agile teams across Salesforce technology. And in fact, we've expanded that rollout now. We have agile coaching within our marketing department and more. Previously, most of those teams were mostly co-located. It's not really much of a surprise to everybody now during a pandemic that we are starting to coach teams and being successful from anywhere. In fact, Success from Anywhere is a big initiative that we're working on right now to empower teams to figure out what is their best way of navigating this new normal. Along that way, we try to give teams a lot of autonomy. A lot of this is built on that psychological safety. It's a lot of built on letting the engineers, letting the Scrum teams drive the process, to drive the tooling, drive the engineering. And to that end, we also allow them to drive what framework works best for them, whether it be Scrum, Kanban, some amalgamation of the two. The important thing to us is still the principles and values. So that being said, about 70% of the teams right now have chosen Scrum framework, mostly software development teams, as we'd expect. About 30% have chosen Kanban, mostly infrastructure and ops teams, as you'd expect. But there are some infrastructure teams that have opted for Scrum. There are some dev teams that have opted for Kanban. That's fine. We want to provide them that autonomy, so long as we're guiding them on the principles and the values, as we mentioned earlier. I won't spend much time here. This isn't really much of a surprise to folks. Teams have a product owner, which guides the backlog, guides the North Star we're building towards. The team itself is empowered to drive the engineering, drive the process, et cetera. Teams have a Scrum Master, although it's not necessarily normal. Teams also tend to have a Kanban Master because that role is really about coaching the team. It's like a team captain role. It's not just thou shalt, do this because this is what Scrum says. It's really facilitating that camaraderie, facilitating that teamwork. At this time, we don't have, for the most part, folks full-time just as product owner or just as Scrum Master. Most of our product owners are product managers. We do have product owners in our infrastructure org that are architects, functional managers, even engineers. And same thing with Scrum Masters. We have functional managers as Scrum Masters. We have engineers as Scrum Masters. The important thing, though, is we coach them to make sure they know what hat they have on at a given time. We don't want a functional manager to tell the team exactly what to do, when to do it, just because they happen to be the Scrum Master. That's the kind of anti-pattern that we look for as coaches. So how we scale is pretty straightforward. We're clouds. Salesforce in the cloud is a metaphor we use everywhere. For us, our large product lines are clouds. Our large organizations, even internally, are referred to as clouds. Each cloud has its own budget. And within each cloud is something between 5 and 100 teams per cloud, depending on the size of the cloud. Now that can introduce at times cross-cloud dependencies. For example, our security org is its own cloud, so to speak. They may have an ask of, say, our marketing cloud, so there'll be dependencies there. The important thing is to make sure that that's resolved at the highest level so that by the time it gets to a Scrum team, they know a priority list, not multiple priority lists.
And just a calibration note here, Salesforce during the year of living dangerously was about the size of a medium to small cloud today. We've grown that much. So it seemed like a big bang transformation at the time, but it really would be in the scope of a single Agile coach today.
So note about planning, in the past, we presented this as kind of an onion. And the reason for that is that each level of planning supports the level above it. So that way we stay aligned to the broader plan. It starts with a 3 to 5 year long range plan. Where are we going as a company, as a cloud, as a product in the next 3 to 5 years? Within a single year, every cloud, and in fact, every individual within Salesforce is required to produce a V2MOM, which stands for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. That ensures that we're aligned as an organization to where we're going for a given year. And then that plan is aligned to our long-range plan. As we get further down into that onion I mentioned earlier, we have, for example, our 2-release roadmap. So this is a projection of the next 2 releases building towards our V2 MOM. Within that, we'll have a release plan. What are we targeting for this release to build towards the 2RR, towards the V2 MOM, so on and so forth. Up to this point, these are all projections. We mentioned earlier kind of the safe harbor slide. Some things may not make it because some things may not have quite the right quality we're looking for. Some things may turn out not to work out the way we expected. We learn things along the way. As we get down to an iteration, this is your sprint plan, this is your 2-week plan. That's where we're going to try to lock in for the next 2 weeks. What are we going to build? And then at the end, inspect and adapt, which may alter the plans above it. And of course, we have our daily stand-ups or daily scrum, or we're planning for a given day towards a sprint, towards a release plan, and so on and so forth. We mentioned earlier, we want to build quality in. And to that end, we want to make sure that every team has a clear definition of what it means to be done. Some things are kind of set at a higher level. For example, we don't want to have P0 to P2 bugs. We don't have security bugs in something that's considered done. But by and large, we leave the definition of done to the teams. That may include monitoring best practices, security best practices, code reviews, proper automation, proper unit testing, how we're going to deploy, so on and so forth. We want to make sure that teams use a definition of done to ensure the quality and engineering best practices we need to succeed. So there's a lot to coaching. And as you step into a cloud for the first time, there's a lot you can look at. What we try to do is start with a few small steps. Number one is kind of an obvious one. We need a single priority list. You cannot succeed with 5 number ones. So we'll try to get teams to look through their backlogs, try to get the broader cloud to look at their backlogs and just consolidate into one stack ranked list rather than multiple lists where teams aren't sure what's next. We want to get into the habit of demoing completed work frequently. One, this gets into the idea that inspect and adapt cycle, but also it gets into the habit of building some sort of complete feature every single sprint, every single week, so on and so forth, versus trying to build towards something 3 months later. And we also want to facilitate at least one improvement every 2 weeks in your process. I've worked with some teams for as many as 6 years, going back to my days with Marketing Cloud. Those teams, as great as they are, still have items for improvement. There's no such thing as perfect. So let's get into the habit of constantly getting better. Let's get into the habit of speaking up and calling out things that we want to improve on, because that in and of itself empowers the teams and moves the teams towards success.
Noel, is this a team slide? So that one set of stack ranked priorities, is that on a team by team basis?
It is, but at the same time, we try to work with our executives to make sure that what they're presenting down to teams is clearer. We can't always avoid at the highest possible level number ones, but we can start directing folks to a product owner who can arbitrate for that team and say, well, of all these number ones, this is the number one, and the team knows exactly where to look.
So sorry, let me restate my question. My question, you
Yes.
said that there is one stack ranked priority set. Is that at the cloud level or the team level?
The team has one stack rank priority. The team has one and only one backlog.
Yeah,
Yes.
it cascades down from the higher levels, and the higher levels are lower fidelity, as you might imagine. As you get down to a cloud and then individual teams, it gets sharper and more clear about what each team is going to do. So they are related through the V2 MOM, but each team has their own backlog.
We try our best to coach leaders to have fewer and fewer number ones, but we can definitely influence that at the team level.
And I think you can see from this slide here the incremental evolutionary change, the small steps to start and make one improvement to your process every 2 weeks. And what I'm going to do now is take you through the story of that kind of work with my clients in the mobile cloud. You just heard all the content of how we tell our customers about how we work. That content is that you saw before this point in the presentation is mostly from our external executive briefings that we give at the Salesforce Innovation Center. And now I'm going to turn to content I used internally in a very significant change initiative with my clients. So you're going to get an insider view of how Agile and Kanban works in product development here at Salesforce. We're going to see a very good example of thinking big and taking small steps to start. I'm a big fan of the pragmatic, actionable, evidence-based guidance in the Kanban method and the Kanban maturity model. And as an accredited Kanban consultant, I use this guidance every day, whether I talk about it explicitly or not. Sometimes we joke about the Kanban Fight Club. But anyway, I'm going to tell you about some of my work using Kanban to explain the steps that I took along the way. And now we're coming to the role play that I foreshadowed earlier. And a quick warning, I'm about to make Noel very uncomfortable for a short period of time. Hey, Noel.
I can handle it.
Hey, Noel, I just finished my assessment tour, and boy, do I have insights for you. Your teams are using a whole basket full of deplorable product development processes. They're clinging to their ancient ways of working and their terrible bad habits. I know just how to fix this. We'll put a red badge of shame on every team's profile. Everyone involved will have to wear a scarlet number until they turn themselves green by adopting the practices that I'm selling you. How does that make you feel, Noel?
Who are you? Get out of here.
Indeed. So it's exaggerated only a little bit from how some consultants work. And what I want to point out here is you're doing it wrong invokes emotional resistance. Being judged or assessed by outsiders is often perceived as a threat to group and individual identity and even security. The group will take steps to protect itself, starting by rejecting the judgment and assessment and ignoring the remediation recommendations. You won't get anywhere by telling people that they're doing it wrong. We have abundant evidence that people make choices against their rational self-interest when their identity is threatened. We've all seen this pattern many times. So I don't want to repeat this anti-pattern. I know there's a better way to foster lasting change, and that comes with acknowledging that change is a social process. Because it's a social process, managers and leaders play a crucial role. Leadership is not telling people how to do their job. Leadership instead is modeling values and behavior to evolve the culture towards getting better outcomes. If maturity models are maps for managed evolution, then leadership is the trail guide for that journey. As we guide our organizations along our trails, we strive to avoid two particular failure modes. The first is complacency. That's stopping too soon. You've reached a false plateau and you think there's nothing more to improve. Of course, there's a whole mountain in front of you still to climb. The second failure mode is overreaching. It's trying to climb the mountain in one step, which you won't be able to do and will wear you out and make you give up and stop trying. So neither of those failure modes is where we want to be. As leaders, we want to light up just the next bit of trail right in front of our organization so that they can take the step forward. So what's the recipe for that? The recipe or the formula for step-by-step evolutionary change is all right here in this cartoon from the blue book, David Anderson's Kanban book. It's a stressor plus a reflection mechanism plus leadership. The reflection mechanism in this cartoon is the board behind the cartoon characters. And you can see that they each have a little bit of stress about the amount of work that's in their column, whether it's too much or in the case of the tester in this cartoon, too little. The active leadership is the character on the right calling for them to do something about it. So with that introductory material, we're all ready now to appreciate my story of rapid release at massive scale in the mobile cloud at Salesforce. And I want to begin by recalling the first retrospective I facilitated when I came into the mobile cloud near the end of 2016. That team had just had an entire release worth of feature work canceled. You can imagine the morale issues that came up in that retrospective. Using John Cutler's Think Big, Work Small graphic, I can say we're very clearly in the third column here of define big, work small. The Agile at Salesforce transformation we talked about earlier enables working in small increments to deliver big results. But in this team, the 4-month release cycle felt like an eternal slog, and they didn't get to the finish line. The work didn't ship. Flow was blocked. This should remind you pretty strongly of the original transformation we talked about earlier. And as I was seeking to understand that already stressful situation, senior leaders in the company challenged us, taking their inspiration from a Facebook engineering blog on rapid release at massive scale. And they asked our organization, could we do something similar? That was the additional stressor I needed to get my mobile clients to engage with the evolutionary change process. We value trust and customer success, and our culture demanded that we restore the flow of releases to live up to those values. And we came to the point of realizing we needed to ship smaller batches more often to make our work keep on flowing to the customer. How did we decide that? It wasn't by a big bang identity threatening change like I modeled for you in the role play we just did. In fact, it took 3 years of steady step-by-step incremental progress. And we started by trying to influence the desire to change. As we've been saying all along, change is hard and change is a social process. But we also know that people are more likely to change to gain or keep something they value. It's another reason why we start with values. So I took 3 relevant persona and painted the picture of what they could achieve if we could learn how to deliver more frequently in smaller batches. And each persona has different ways of thinking about the values, and the change has something in it for all of them. Any of you who worked in the mobile space know that when Apple or Google release a new phone or a new operating system, it's a combination of great opportunity and a great risk of things breaking. There are great new mission critical capabilities that you want to exploit, yet the new operating system could bring all of your apps down if there is something in it that your apps can't handle. So selling to the product managers the vision that we could support new releases out of Apple or Google on the day they launch was a pretty powerful motivating factor. Our customers, being accustomed to working in the enterprise, know that software isn't perfect, but they do expect it to work with a high degree of reliability. And when it breaks, they expect a responsive company to fix it. So to get them lined up with this, what we envisioned was that we could diagnose and fix an issue in production that would have blocked their mission critical internal app launch for the phone call in which they reported the problem was over. That's quick case resolution in a confident manner is a great motivating factor. And the developer happiness side of that is the ability to actually do that, to solve the customer's problem without having to work nights and weekends to deliver the goods here. So those are the kinds of things that our leaders and our employees and our customers value. And so they're more likely to want to make this change in order to get or keep those things that they value. Storytelling matters in social processes, and we can express a future narrative by putting all those things together into a short vision statement that tells the story of what we could do if we could accomplish this change. This vision statement lights up the trail we are about to blaze together. And in this case, it was that the mobile cloud can exploit emerging market opportunities and address developing threats with an industry-leading SLA and a developer experience that attracts the best and brightest talent, engineers who delight in focusing on delivering value. Who wouldn't want to work in an organization like that? And Kanban and Salesforce both call for leading with values. These are the values I amplified in my call for action. Trust is our #1 value, so we're going to do this work in a way that makes safety a prerequisite that protects engineers from making mistakes and helps them fix problems before customers encounter them. We're going to have a build, test, and deploy pipeline in environments that have an SLA equal to or better than production. We express the value of customer success by wanting to make customers awesome by giving them value continuously, by having the best SLA in the business for making changes to production. And we're going to express the value of innovation here by making developers awesome, by giving engineers a low friction, high productivity working experience where they can experiment and learn rapidly and focus on delivering world-class services. Some 3 years later, we can now tell the story of what we have done through the change process that was started with that call to action. So I'm going to come back and finish the slide that I showed you a little bit earlier. We found and removed a lot of obstacles on the path to shipping every 2 weeks. We adjusted engineering practices, especially attention to definition of done. You might remember Noel's slide about definition of done. We had to move to a continuous quality process in order to be able to do this. And we found the discipline it takes to keep meeting that goal release after release. The benefits go well beyond fewer bugs. We're also actively monitoring production health and addressing availability issues before customers report them. And we've unlocked business agility by enabling our product managers to run safe experiments in production. Great engineers working confidently in a safety-first ecosystem can achieve amazing results. This holiday note from our leadership team calls it out. On behalf of the executive management team, we want to take a moment to thank you for all the incredible work you've accomplished this past year. We're delivering more value to our customers sooner, and the pace and quality of our releases has never been better. Every bolded word in that statement is measurable, and we have the data to prove it. Engineers deliver value to customers by changing production systems. That's our biggest lever. It's also our biggest risk. We don't want to break customers, confuse them, violate sharing boundaries, and we don't want to bloat our applications with features that customers don't use. So let's dig in just a little bit more to see how we do that. We found a way to ship a new version of the app to app stores every 2 weeks while still respecting the major release governance model that is held all across Salesforce. A rigorous 2-week development cycle followed by a 2-week verification cycle, including a customer beta. So we're collecting customer feedback very early in the process, and that's followed by a staggered rollout. We learned how to do this safely with staggered rollouts and progressive delivery. So first we'll roll it out to internal users. And if it's working as we expect, we'll roll it out to early adopters in our customers, and finally all the way to all the production orgs. And if we find any issues, we can pause the rollout and fix it before we roll forward, or even roll back if we have to put the car back in the shop and get it going. This is the way that we keep our cadence going and are confident in taking measured risks. One of the things that came out of this work was building a production health dashboard that's always available. It captures key application health indicators. We needed this in order to monitor our staggered rollouts to know when it was okay to spread the release wider, but it's also helped us change our engineering culture for the better, because now we're all hyper aware of customer experience, and we strive continuously to keep our numbers in range. So that's an example of a great outcome influencing the culture for the better, and it's what I meant by shipping every 2 weeks changed our engineering culture for the better. We just had to get better reflection mechanisms and ways to see what was going on, and that led us to new and great things, which I'll talk about on the next couple of slides. But first, I'm going to mention the developer experience impact. I want to compare and contrast how release coverage was handled before and after these changes. Consider responding to a high priority customer case because there was a new feature in the app that the customer wasn't expecting. Previously, this sort of change would have required a whole new build. We would have had to go through the whole release cycle and turn it off for every customer. It would have meant weekend work for engineers and managers. And if you add App Store approval, it was at least 4 days worth of work just to change one thing. But with the changes that we learned how to do, this turned into a single pull request for the engineer on release duty. That pull request turned off the feature for only this one customer. No app release, no regression testing, no executive approval needed. From the investigation being filed to the customer signing off, less than 4 hours, and most of that time was spent waiting on the customer to confirm the plan and confirm the fix. So you think back to the vision that I painted before we started this work, that we could fix a problem while the customer was still on the phone complaining about it. This is pretty close to that. And it not only made the customer happy, but it makes our engineers a lot happier too. So making changes safely is how we keep customer trust, and it's how we improve our developer experience. Safety enables delivering sooner by reducing business and technical risk, and we're now able to ship our app every 2 weeks. Progressive delivery is safe delivery, and the frequent deployments to production with short feedback cycles have changed our culture for the better. We're proud to share that our team has won an internal award for delivering customer success. Our continuous quality program shifted left to shorten the feedback loop and enabled us to find issues early before we ship and deliver sustained value to our customers release after release. The earlier focus on quality and performance has also led us to have better insights into what's going on in production, the production health monitoring that I already mentioned. But wait, there's more. Safety breeds confidence, breeds innovation. Our growing confidence to take measured risks enables product and engineering to collaborate in new and meaningful ways. We can now do experiments in production. We're firmly in that fourth column of John Cutler's Think Big, Work Small graphic. We're still doing think big and define big at the release level. But when we say work small, we're not just doing chunks of stuff for our own satisfaction. We're putting it in production, getting feedback from customers, and using that feedback to adjust the plan to steer us to the finish line sooner than we would otherwise. Our product team has certainly embraced this. And one example of that is we had a hackathon earlier this year where our engineers completed over 20 engineering complete features in one day. That's over 20 features or 20 options for product to consider releasing and over 20 potential value hypotheses to test in production. So better developer experience is going to yield developer customer experience as this stuff goes into production. So we're coming to the end of my part of the presentation here. And I want to say that our CTO and co-founder, Parker Harris, loves to use the phrase trusted agility. And like all the executives I've ever worked with, he doesn't lie awake at night worrying whether his teams are being agile or doing agile or whether they use Kanban or Scrum. But he does worry whether we have enough agility to respond to market opportunities and threats and to do it in a way that has enterprise levels of trust. So trusted agility is how we live and how we do things. It's a really great match for the Kanban method and the Kanban maturity model. It unlocks amazing capabilities and achievements. And if I had to sum it up, it would be that together we're learning to deliver more value sooner with higher quality, that safety and confidence together encourage us to think and dream big, and that progressive delivery helps us start small and learn fast. That's evolutionary change right there. So let's pause for a moment to consider how this might help your work. These 3 questions help gauge your journey to trusted agility. Do your activities focus on people? Change is a social process. Emotions matter. Are you continuously improving and evolving your processes and products? Better, never best. Don't get caught in the complacency trap. And are you frequently delivering value and delighting your customers? I've just taken you on a product development journey where the answer to all those 3 questions is an emphatic yes. But product development is not your only business process. So our next exercise will light up the trail towards agile business processes. And we're going to go right to the same product marketing phrase, but we're going to remove the word work here and ask, is there anything else in your world where if you could make it flow, something that's important in terms of outcomes would grow? Noel, do you have an example to start us off with?
Absolutely. From my new role, when the recruiting pipeline flows, the employee base grows.
So there's a foreshadowing of the tail end of our presentation here. I see Ron's got a good comment. When the collaboration flows, customer satisfaction or customer success grows. I think there's some elements of that both in the original Agile at Salesforce story, where collaboration got harder when we no longer fit into one floor of the same building, and we had to figure out a way to make collaboration flow. There's also some of it in the story I told of the collaboration has to go up to get work out the door into production every 2 weeks. Anybody else have any examples to throw into the conversation here? Security approvals. I guess that's another kind of work, but still.
good one in the chat here. And sharing communication flows, innovation.
Innovation grows, right? That's a great call out there. And that's I could also tie that back to our equality value, and if we have a diversity of people communicating, innovation is going to grow as well. Beer, oh, when the beer flows, connection grows. Thank you, Ed. That's a brilliant one. When the improvement flows, the value grows. I like that one. When the transparency flows, the openness grows. Those are all really great examples. And they're all like highlighted by how important flow is. When your value flow stagnates, when your transparency stagnates, everything slows down. Here's another one from Ron. When trusted psychological safety flows, team cohesiveness and flow and productivity grows. Yeah, that's a really good one. Psychological safety is really super important. If your flow is blocked and your people don't feel like they can speak up about what is blocking the flow, it's going to stay blocked longer. When the creativity flows, the product grows. Thanks, Alina. Too much money in software. All right, I think we've got enough of those examples. One more here from Philip. When the practice flows, the talent grows. That speaks to the old saying of if something hurts, do it more often until it doesn't hurt anymore. Because then you're building the knowledge of how to do that less painfully. I think we're pretty warmed up on the business processes. So now I'm going to ask Noel to bring us home and talk about the work in his new strategy and operations role.
Thanks, Erik. And yeah, when I saw practice and talent, I thought of the Agile bassist, thinking that he's probably, practice, and talent will flow. So in my new role, I lead a lot of business processes for our technology COO organization, which oversees our learning and culture organization, our content experience and doc writer organization, and amazingly enough, our Agile coaches. And that's important for me to keep in mind because as I'm sitting here having this talk with Erik, that means that things that I am working on during the day can have a direct impact on Erik's life. And as we go into the next couple of slides, what we're going to see here is that a lot of the processes that I'm working on are still systems, and they can still benefit from systems thinking and can benefit from Kanban thinking. I had a meeting with a marketing cloud leader I used to support not long ago after I took this role. And he turned to me and said, I'm surprised because you're not working with systems anymore and you're so into tech. And my response to him was that I am still working with systems. So I'm responsible, for example, for recruiting, ensuring that we're filling our open headcount properly, for finance and budget tracking. Each of these are systems, whether it be processing a purchase order all the way through procurement and fulfillment, or an open rec all the way through recruiting, sourcing a pipeline and filling it and onboarding a new hire. All of these are systems. They may not be software, but the same principles still apply. So what I'm going to go through here is a real world example, just taking recruiting, which is something I'm working on right now, and walking you through the Kanban principles so you can see how I'm going to take that thinking into improving this process. So the first principle is start with what you do now. And coming in new to the role, I don't really have a clue how the recruiting works. So I had to sit down and say, well, what exists? What is the current process? Who are the important folks? Who are the folks that are taking part in the process? How does this process flow? What tools are there? What systems exist for tracking and processing open headcount? What data exists? What are the challenges being reported by leaders? So step one is basically take the current system and make it visible. Make it visible through reports, make it visible. If I have to sketch it out, sit down, have interviews, just visualize what's going on right now. And number two, we need to agree to incremental evolutionary change. This is doubly important within recruiting and other business processes because I can't very well just say, look, we need to work on a new process. We're just going to stop recruiting, right? Salesforce is growing way too fast to do something like that. So what we need to do is figure out where we have our inefficiencies and make improvements there. So if I go back to the recruiting example, one of the things I've been doing is mapping out where our recruiting pipeline stops along the way, whether it be taking a while to get a recruiter assignment, whether it be taking a while to process an offer. Along the way, there are bottlenecks. Let's find out where they are, and then let's figure out what we can do to improve the process at those bottlenecks. We need to respect the current process. The fact is, most of the current process is comprised of either hiring managers, which are certainly not HR experts, or recruiters that are absolutely slammed right now. There is some turnover within recruiting because guess what? We have the great resignation, I think is what the news is calling it right now. Everyone's got some turnover. So there's turnover in recruiting, engineering, other companies. I know folks all throughout the industry. All this is happening at a time that Salesforce is growing rapidly. We're on track to, I think we're talking about, what is it, 60 billion we're talking about in the news in the next 5 years. That's our goal. Well, that means we're going to be hiring fast. So we have recruiters that are working really hard. We have hiring managers that have things going on. There's no time to sit down and say, well, this process stinks, what were you thinking? But there's also no time for saying, look, whatever is working for you, we're going to stop because this is a better process. If something's working for someone, we have to leave it alone. Things that are working can stay in place. Things that need improvements, that's where we're going to step in. The fact is, if a manager happens to have a backdoor to getting a recruiter assigned in 3 hours, it may not be process, but from a business standpoint, nobody's going to back me coming in saying, you have to stop that and here's my new process that'll get you a recruiter in 72 hours. Wouldn't make a lot of sense. So where things are working, we're going to leave them alone. We're also going to encourage active leadership at all levels. The fact is, I'm one person supporting a 503 person organization that also supports a 9,200 person organization. There are tons of processes that I'm involved with. There's no way that I can scale to handle all this, but there's also no way the business benefits if all innovation for any process impacting this org goes through me. It wouldn't make a lot of sense. So within recruiting, I started by meeting with some key ops and strategy leaders from other orgs to see what they're doing that we can apply within our own org, which is kind of similar to encouraging code reuse for engineers. There was some existing reporting, some existing dashboards that I could start with, tweak, and then build an enhanced suite of reporting based on what's already there. Where hiring managers are able to reach out to recruiting leaders and move things along, we're absolutely encouraging that. Where there's a possibility for automating some of this, we're absolutely encouraging that. We're just not going to have innovation flow through one person because it's just never going to scale. And on a personal note, with so much going on, it's easy to get mired in kind of the day-to-day tactical. But I believe that Agile really does work. And I believe it to the point that I try to live it myself and I try to borrow some of the practices myself. And so with all the things going on, I've kind of started up my own personal scrum, basically 1 week sprints. Every week, I'm taking a look at what I'm trying to achieve for the business. If something tactical is coming in, I'm taking a look and seeing what I've tried to commit to for the week, and then making trade-offs. At the end of each of these sprints, if you will, I do my own retros to see, where am I not efficient? I need to be as efficient as possible to do all the things that are on my plate. But I'm also seeing what goals have I achieved, and then I very tactically, if you will, set this sprint review right before my weekly one-on-one with my leader so that I can go right in and say, oh, by the way, these are the things that I've delivered for the org in this week, and these are the things I'm planning for the next week. It seems like overhead, but it lets me focus on the outcomes that the org needs rather than the output that's needed at any one point in time. What I mean by that is I need the business value to flow from me as well. just like earlier we talked about the flow of recruiting open headcounts, we need value to flow. And this ensures that my focus is on how to make that happen.
All right, I recognize we ran a little long here, but this really is the last slide of content. And this sums up the entire presentation in one slide. Where do you want to go? This is business, so it's up and to the right. When do you want to get there? You want to get there sooner. Evolutionary change works in many contexts, from product development to recruiting. Manage flow to learn fast and achieve fitness for purpose sooner. Let it flow to let it grow and yield the great results that you and your customers desire and deserve. With that, I want to thank you for your kind attention. Your time is valuable, and we really appreciate that you chose to spend it with us tonight. Now we're open for Q&A, and I'll leave these Kanban resources up on the screen in case you're interested in researching the material further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erik and Noel. Thank you so much. While you have a chance to get like a drink of water or something to refresh your throat and have a little moment of peace, I would like to launch a poll for our audience, very short one. So just give us a feedback on the event. We're always learning, and not from anyone but you, our participants, because we're trying to deliver value to you. There are 2 questions, and if you have any comments for us or desires, please submit them in the chat box. We'll go through them later on.
Really great presentation, guys. Elena, is it okay to ask questions now while the poll is going on?
Sure. I just want to make another small announcement. I hear rain, people. I'm so happy. It's raining outside. Yes.
Yay! Yay to no fires. So I'd like to ask a question for both of you, and I know, Noel, you need to run fairly soon. Back when you talk about, like, you know, the V2 MOM, the V2 MOM and all that stuff, when you're talking about enterprise level planning, the 2 to 5 year plans, things like that, are you doing kind of like synchronized planning, or are all the efforts largely decoupled, say within one of the clouds? You know, are you doing like PI planning where the quarterly planning is synchronized in any form or anything like that?
I can start that, Erik, and then I know you've had some experience in the past with that level of planning. So the planning is meant to cascade from the highest levels down, but it is somewhat synchronized. So, for example, at this point in time for FY23, Mark Benioff and the C-suite are finalizing their V2 MOMs, and I happen to know that our technology V2 MOM is being drafted right now. Ironically, I'm going to be flying out to your land over there, and next week we're doing our own V2 MOM for the technology COO organization. But the idea is, as one level's ready, the next level should take a cue from that, and then the next level takes a cue from that, etc. But where there's parallel orgs, they're happening basically at the same time.
Okay, but if they're not in parallel, then they're free to do whatever they want, I assume.
Well, because it cascades down, it all starts with, you know, Mark Benioff's V2 MOM. Until that's done, you know, nobody else is really going to proceed. So there are some gating points along the way. But yeah, like when security gets started, they may blow through it a lot faster than, say, Marketing Cloud or Commerce Cloud.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a very dynamic situation in that you could have a 3 to 5 year long range plan and then have 3 to 5 major acquisitions in that 3 to 5 years. And they wouldn't be part of that original planning, but they would have to be folded into it. And it may change the plans that are in place already. So it really is like the longer range plans have less fidelity and they're more directional or aspirational. You could even call them a North Star. And then as you get closer and closer to the present, they get sharper and more specific.
Okay. I guess the question I'm asking is, like, is there some sort of enterprise schedule that everybody is in lockstep together, or are you free to decouple in that way and, you
Yeah.
know, only couple the schedules where it makes sense?
Yeah, those 3 major releases a year are the major cadences in the organization. So
Okay.
there's an annual cadence for the V2 Mom, and then the shorter cadences for those releases. And every 2 or 3 years, we also do an update of our long range plans.
Okay. But like your teams are not like on the same sprint schedule, that type of thing, are they?
Not down to the sprint level,
No.
definitely
Okay,
not.
No,
thank you. That's-
even if they were, we'd acquire some company that wouldn't be on it, so it wouldn't last very long.
Yeah, got
So
it.
can I follow up on Wee's question? When it gets down to the 2 release level, do those 2 release, so you talk about cascading down, but does the 2 release level have to be approved up?
Yeah, and a lot of the reason to do the 2 release review is to call out the dependencies. So if you've got something in your 2 release plan that needs me to do something and I don't know about it, and I raise my hand and say, well, wait a minute, I wasn't planning to do that until later, then we have a chance to negotiate the timing and adjust when what you're going to do would be ready based on my dependency.
Well, so
I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a formal review and approval like Ron is talking about, but it's usually done by the cloud leaders or at that level anyway. So it's informed there, but there's nothing like saying, all right, as EVP of this cloud, you know, I'm signing off in the 2RR, for example.
So what's the review cycle when a team comes up with the 2 release site? The 2 release is at the team plan, is at the team level, right?
No, those are usually cloud leaders talking to each other.
So the cloud leaders have a 2 release plan, and the teams are then working on the first of those, and then the second of those releases, presumably, and it probably changes. To what extent does the cloud leaders 2 release plan have to be approved by, say, Mark Benioff or some executive level above the cloud leader?
Although there isn't a super explicit event of approval, they definitely know, and the 2-hour plan wouldn't go out without their input being added. So
there's socialization.
Yeah, it's a very much a relationship-based company. We don't, a lot of times, instead of talking about a cloud by the product line, we'll talk about it by the name of the leader.
So one of the things that I see sometimes in that iterative loop, I'll call it that, is oh gee, that 2 release plan has to be approved at the level above that, and that takes, and it's like, oh, they've got opinions, and they want to affect that plan, and it's months of it very much looks like waterfall.
Yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate observation.
Yeah, it's not I in this new role, I'm seeing how that's happening at the highest levels, and it's not a formal sign off per se, but because everybody's responsible for their V2MOM and how it relates to the higher V2MOM, your 2RR, where it pivots, still needs to ensure that it's driving your leader's V2MOM above you. Otherwise, there are going to be questions. So you can pivot so long as you're still in alignment with the overall organization goals.
It really is enforced by socialization. It's a social process as much as the change management I was talking about. And it's a moving target, like I said. And you can have a plan and then something will happen that will blow it up. You can imagine that acquiring Slack changed a lot of plans.
As Mike Tyson once said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Well, when we acquire a company every 15 minutes, you have to be able to be agile.
Very true.
So I'll ask a totally different question. So one of the things that one of you said, I can't remember who, was we might have engineering managers be scrum masters. Now, there's a lot of conversation about never having engineering managers be Scrum Masters, at least for teams that of which anyone on the team works for that engineering manager, because of your earlier value of psychological safety. How do you deal with that?
Well, I'm going to give you a glib answer first. Is we have a box of hats with two brims, and the one side says Scrum Master and the other side says Engineering Manager. And we send them to people occasionally and say, make sure you have the right hat on when you're doing a manager thing versus a Scrum Master thing.
Okay, but I'm J-random programmer, and I know that that guy or that woman is responsible for my bonus and my my salary increment.
Yeah, and that's something that people will complain about, and in some cases is a problem, and that's why we have coaches and senior leaders in order to, take corrective action when that sort of stuff happens. You can't make it perfect all the time, but you can notice when that happens and take steps. And it's a matter of policy that our senior engineering leader wants engineering managers to have Scrum Master experience, and he feels like they're in the best position to remove blockers because they have the authority. And so that's not the hill that I want to die on.
I'll add to that one thing, and then we actually have a great resource for this as it happens. But when we're certifying Scrum Masters, we're observing Scrum Masters, we're looking at them regardless of their business title. And if they are in a functional manager role, I've seen it in the past where a candidate is trying to get certified because the organization wants to certify X%, but they're also a functional manager, and they're coming in and they're saying, all right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Hey, that's not 10, that's not 13 points, that's really 5. So I'm going to change that. Immediately, my feedback is you're not ready for certification. I've got to let your manager know you're not ready for certification. That's not what we're looking for. To me, it doesn't matter if you're a functional manager, director, an SVP, or an engineer. If that's how you're acting, that's not the Scrum Master we're looking for. As it happens, I know we happen to have somebody on the call here from Marketing Cloud who's watching here from Indianapolis, who happens to be a functional manager who has been a Scrum Master, and I've worked with him, so hopefully he gives the right kind of answers. But Cameron, I know you're on the line. Want to weigh in since you're in that exact situation?
Hey, first time caller and also first time listener. It's a great topic, and I've been on the same team for 10 years in a multitude of different roles, right? From Scrum Master to product owner to engineer to now director, right? And as the frontline manager, the biggest and most important thing in the conversation is when you look at the principles of Agile itself, you say the Scrum Master is there to protect the team. And when you looked at the product owner, the product is there to get things done. And when you look at the engineering manager, they're there to make sure that the engineers have what they need so that they can get things done, right? And as the engineering manager in this particular scenario, as the Scrum Master, I want to get things done, but at the same time, I have to make sure, like Erik said a moment ago, I put on my Scrum Master hat and really focus on protecting the team and working with the product owner. That product owner and Scrum Master relationship has to be in very good shape in order for the functional manager to be a good Scrum Master or a good product owner from the perspective of Agile. As long as you can have that, you can also have a situation where, or I shouldn't say a situation, but you also have to think about the perspective of the engineers as well, right? If you have a junior engineer on the team or someone who's fresh out of college and their direct manager who can influence everything about their job is the Scrum Master, they're going to be very standoffish. They may not want to push back. So you have to encourage that challenge and that collaboration and the in a good way, right? And then just make sure that they understand a trusted environment. And the best way to do that, I think, is through the team agreements. So I know the team agreements weren't really talked about here today, but I've found that that's a very good way a very good method to gauge all that.
Great answer.
Thanks, Cameron.
Yep.
Nice to see you again, Cameron.
You as well. By the way, Erik interviewed me like 10 years ago.
Yeah, in a different company. That was before ExactTarget was acquired by Salesforce.
Yeah.
Shall I open?
Could I ask a quick question? So, hi guys. I was just wondering, maybe on a professional and also a personal level, what has been a learning opportunity for you guys over the last 18 months with like COVID and, you know, all the other fun things that's been happening in US?
Well, COVID is an obvious cue there. I talked a lot about extinction level events and punctuation points in evolutionary biology. And you could argue that the pandemic has been a gigantic punctuation point in affecting our ways of working. And it's upset a lot of widely held expectations about having to go into the office to get things done, and whether you need to be co-located to do great work or not. And because we can't be co-located, especially before the vaccines came out, we've had to do experiments and adapt to things that we wouldn't have probably taken on otherwise. And I think, you know, there's been lots of things that we learned about that. I particularly like not having to get on the train every morning, and I can spend time thinking instead of doing that. But in terms of how to build relationships in a very much a relationship-driven business, we're still figuring out how to replace the face-to-face contact in the offices that we grew accustomed to. It's definitely a punctuation point in the evolution of work.
Dee, how are you guys weathering out COVID in New Zealand? It's so interesting to have a person from, you know, not only in the future, you like in Wednesday, but also like from the other side of the world. How are you doing guys there?
I'm totally in the future, and also the opposite in weather as well. It's our spring, and you know, it's like bright daylight, everything, and quite warm, but probably not as warm as Bay Area. Hey, look, so New Zealand is a very small country, 5 million people, and I think a lot of times people, it's just putting it into context. So because we are isolated, we heavily rely on you know, logistics, people coming, people going, and it has been tough. That's always been a tough point. The other thing is that New Zealand's such a beautiful place to live in that everybody was trying to move here. So for the longest time, we just had a massive population growth, and suddenly it's gone on halt. So we only have this limited human resources now. This is all we can use. And what also happens, because we're such a small nation, we like to protect, well, at least the government of the day is very protective. We've been in a lockdown for 60 days now. In the largest city in New Zealand. So it's like the engine of New Zealand, and it's been put on halt. So you go back to what you guys had in your lockdown in March and April last year. We've just started that again about 60 days ago, and we're still in that space. There is the usual amount of vaccine resistance. Having said that, about you know, I think 70% of the population is now vaccinated, even though, because going to a whole thing that we're small, if something hits us, it hits our health system hard, it hits everyone hard. So we're trying to be very protective of it. Hopefully we can open the borders soon,
Yes,
so we can start traveling. And you all should come and visit. I'll take you around.
Oh yeah, I definitely want to come.
I just got another flows grows when the population flows. No, what immigration population? Something was there. Something flows, something grows. It was the immigration flows, population grows. There you go. There you go. Do we have any other questions for our
Well, I have a second answer to layer on to Dee's question, which is that when you combine the pandemic with our acquisition of Slack, I think we're all going through learning how to like make our headquarters digital. So the Slack first mentality, the digital headquarters thing, that might have come along anyway, but the pandemic certainly accelerated it. And for us at Salesforce, because we have Slack now in our family, it's really changed the way that day-to-day communication happens at work. And frankly, we're still figuring it out. That I would have probably preferred a more incremental and evolutionary step to the sort of big bang rollout that we went through. And I'm hoping that we're going to learn those lessons eventually.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up on that, Erik? That surprises me a lot because Salesforce built something that was Slack-like years ago.
Chatter.
What is it? What was it?
Chatter.
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 Yeah.
Yeah. And so I presumed that a transition from Chatter to Slack would not have been a significant change inside of Salesforce.
It's a very different structure to the communications data. It's very different.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, Chatter is embedded inside the Salesforce app, so it's fairly straightforward to, have a Chatter thread associated with every work item or with every deal that's underway if you're over in the demand side of the house. Basically, Chatter was a decoration of collaboration around every object in the system. And because Slack is external to that, we haven't built those deep integrations yet, but they'll probably be coming. Safe harbor.
It's also worth noting that Slack is real time. Chatter really wasn't. It's a little bit more asynchronous than Slack is. And so, the idea of holding a hangout or a huddle, as Slack now supports, could never really be built into Chatter, where Chatter is organized around these individual objects. Slack's organized around a team or a theme, and it's where you're getting together and doing work real time, as opposed to kind of post and forget, which is how Chatter kind of operated.
Mm-hmm. So can I ask one more question? When I saw the title of the presentation, so this is global question. When I saw the title of the presentation, I thought, oh, Salesforce has switched from Scrum to Kanban. And there's been like one mention of, well, most of our development teams use Scrum. And then I was back to Kanban again, and I'm looking at this final slide that's been up for the last 20 minutes, which says Kanban resources. And I think of Kanban as we don't have sprints, and we don't plan. We pull from the backlog, and I'm getting the Kanban maturity model. But is there really more Kanban here than for the Scrum teams than the maturity model? So I'm still confused. I'm still confused.
Yeah, I specifically chose not to delve into the mechanics of team level Kanban, and my LinkedIn post that I think you saw said this is not a technical talk for Kanban nerds, and I could go to town on how to measure throughput and cycle time and what you could learn from that, and what kind of statistical distributions are helpful and not. But that's I felt wasn't right for this group. And I think there's a widely held view in the field that Kanban is really just, you put a board on the wall and you manage WIP limits and you measure lead time and throughput, and there you go. And I took this as an opportunity to show the larger sort of change leadership approach to Kanban. And if you talk to senior people in the Kanban world, they probably won't give a damn whether teams are using Scrum or Kanban, because the problems that are really interesting are at the cloud to cloud or company to company coordination level. And there, those principles of flow and limiting WIP and the like are just as important as they are at the team level, but they have a much greater impact. So when I first started doing this, I could have easily devolved into Scrum versus Kanban wars, but that's just not productive. So I'd rather like step up a level and say, whether you're using Scrum or Kanban, this is the reason why it works. We're all about making things flow. You limit work in progress by having a time box in Scrum. I limit work in process by having a number on top of the column in Kanban, but it's the same kind of thing. So for me, it's more about the evolutionary change mindset than the sort of mechanical breakdown that the kind of story point driven Scrum suggests.
That's really helpful. I got to the middle of the talk before I finally realized that that's what you were doing.
Great. Thank you. I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking that would be probably the last question we're gonna take today. And I will open breakout rooms, or maybe Walker can help me do that. And we can all hang out and chat. I see lots of people that I haven't seen in ages. So we'll be very happy. Rooms are open. You can choose any room that you want. Walker, you're gonna help me do that? Perfect.